The universe did not end in fire, but in a whisper. Dr. Eris Thorne heard it first, not with her ears, but through the delicate quantum sensors of Deep Watch Station Epsilon, a lonely metal eye adrift in the silent sea between stars. It was a whisper from Elysium, the jewel of humanity's extrasolar crown, a world of turquoise oceans and amber skies where 5 million souls, including her own, had made a home. For 3 years, the data stream from Elysium had been a symphony of life biometric rhythms, atmospheric compositions, the gentle hum of a thriving society. Then, the symphony faltered. The whisper began as a discordant note in the telemetry, a flicker of neural chaos in the colony's collective biofeed. Eris, a xenolinguist whose life's work was the pursuit of understanding, leaned closer to the holographic display, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She had dedicated her life to the belief that any consciousness, no matter how alien, could be met with empathy and reason. Her partner, Liam, a terraforming engineer, had called her the Whisper Catcher, the one who could find the song in any creature's static. Their daughter, 7-year-old Cora, had drawn a picture of her mother with stars in her hair, talking to strange, beautiful aliens. That picture was taped to the console Eris was now watching, a vibrant splash of color in a room of sterile gray. The static from Elysium grew louder, not in volume, but in its wrongness. It wasn't a cry for help. It was the sound of minds unraveling. The feed showed cascades of serotonin and adrenaline flooding the population, collective heart rates spiking in unison, then plummeting. It was a wave of pure, undiluted terror sweeping through 5 million people simultaneously. The source was a signal, a complex, patterned broadcast from the edge of the Cygnus X1 system, a signal of impossible beauty and malevolence. It was a language Aris had never encountered, yet in her bones, she understood its grammar. It was a language of psychic corrosion. This was the Vex. Humanity knew them only as a myth, an enigma that left behind perfectly silent, scoured worlds in its wake. They were a hive mind, a consciousness spread across countless bioluminescent, insectoid bodies, communicating not with words, but with resonant frequencies that vibrated through the fabric of space-time itself. And now, they were singing to Elysium. Eris watched, helpless, as the song took root. The final transmission from the colony was not a voice, but a raw data scream of biological and psychological collapse. The neat graphs of societal harmony twisted into jagged peaks of homicidal rage. Life signs winked out not from an external attack, but from within. As neighbor turned on neighbor, friend on friend, parent on child. The last fragment she received was a single, corrupted image from a public square camera. It showed a fountain plaza where Liam had promised to meet Cora after her school day. The image was a blur of motion and red, a tableau of madness under an indifferent amber sky. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the whisper stopped. The data stream flatlined. The biometrics vanished. The atmospheric regulators, sabotaged from inside the colony's main hub, failed. Elysium, the vibrant jewel, became a silent, sterile tomb. The silence, as it would come to be known, had fallen. Grief was not a wave that washed over Eris Thorne. It was a vacuum that pulled all the light and air from her world. In the sterile debriefing rooms of the Sol Confederacy High Command on Luna, she was a ghost, her voice a monotone recounting of the data. The admirals and politicians listened with grim faces, their minds already turning to fleets and force projections. They saw a strategic loss. Aris saw the ghost of her daughter's laughter in the dead code. Fleet Admiral Valerius, a man whose face seemed carved from asteroid iron, spoke of quarantine and retaliation. "We will dispatch the 3rd and 5th fleets," he declared, his voice a low rumble of military certainty. "We will find their point of origin, and we will bombard it with every kinetic weapon in our arsenal." Eris looked at him then, and for the first time since the silence, a spark ignited in the void of her grief. "You can't," she said, her voice quiet but sharp enough to cut through the room's self-assured murmur. "You can't shoot a song. You can't bomb a thought." Valerius turned his gaze on her, his eyes dismissive of the civilian scientist who dared to question his strategy. "Dr. Thorne, your expertise is noted, but this is now a military matter. You're wrong." Eris insisted, standing up, the motion jerky, unnatural. "This isn't a war for territory. It's a war for sanity. The Vex didn't invade Elysium. They rewrote it. They turned 5 million human minds into a weapon against themselves. Your battleships are useless. You are bringing spears to a war of ideas." The council dismissed her. They offered condolences, a state-funded therapy program, a quiet pension. They wanted to file her away with the tragedy. A sad footnote in the official report. They did not understand that Eris Thorne had died with her family on Elysium. The woman who returned to Earth was something else entirely, a vessel filled with the cold, hard clarity of absolute loss. She possessed a unique, terrible weapon, the full, unredacted data stream from Elysium, and the expertise to translate its horror. The Confederacy had classified the details of the colony's fall, releasing a sanitized story of a sudden, inexplicable plague. They feared panic. Eris feared complacency. Locked in her small apartment in the gleaming spires of New Alexandria, surrounded by the ghosts of a life that was no longer hers, she worked. She took the raw telemetry, the psychological terror, the final, corrupted image of the fountain, and she wove them into a narrative. She didn't leak a document. She unleashed a memory. She bypassed the official news networks and sent it directly to the public data nets, a viral ghost that spread through the system like a contagion of truth. Billions saw it. They saw the heart rates of children spike in their classrooms. They felt the echo of the Vex's psychic shriek in the raw brainwave data. They saw the scientific proof of a world driven mad. The sanitized government story evaporated in a firestorm of public fury and terror. Eris Thorne's name, once known only in quiet academic circles, was now on every tongue. She was the oracle of the silence, the only one who had truly looked into the abyss. She began to speak, not on official channels, but in illicit public forums and encrypted networks. Her voice, once gentle and measured, was now honed to a fine, sharp edge. The Confederacy offers you shields and warships. She broadcasted from a hidden server, her face pale and illuminated by the glow of her screen. They promise to protect your bodies. But the Vex are not interested in your bodies. They are coming for your minds. They are a consciousness that seeks to erase ours, not with fire, but by turning our own thoughts against us. Her words resonated with a population suddenly terrified of their own silent thoughts. The old ways of war felt clumsy, obsolete. Admiral Valerius and the Confederacy saw their public support crumble. They were preparing for a fistfight while the enemy was already inside their heads. The Vex, as if sensing the shift, began to make their presence known. Small outposts in the Oort cloud went silent. A listening post near Jupiter sent back a final, garbled transmission filled with nursery rhymes sung in screaming, discordant tones. The fear Aris had unleashed was now being fed by the enemy. She was summoned back to Luna, not as a grieving scientist, but as a political necessity. The admirals and politicians who had dismissed her now looked at her with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. She walked into the high command chamber not as a supplicant, but as a prophet. "You cannot win this war with your current methods," she stated, her gaze sweeping over the assembled military elite. "You are trying to kill an organism by clipping its claws, one by one. I am proposing we kill the brain." She laid out her vision, a plan born from the deepest pits of her grief and her intimate knowledge of alien communication. The Vex are a hive mind, connected by a constant psychic resonance. It is their greatest strength and their most profound weakness. If you sever that connection, the individual drones are nothing mindless insects. They will simply cease to function. An admiral scoffed. "And how do you propose we do that?" "Doctor, send a strongly worded letter." "No," Aris replied, her eyes as cold and distant as the void. "We create our own song, a counter-frequency, a mimetic virus designed to infect their psychic network. We will broadcast a signal that doesn't just block their connection, but shatters it. We will give them a taste of what they gave us, the terror of being utterly, completely alone. We will lobotomize their entire species in a single, silent scream." A horrified silence fell over the chamber. What she was proposing was not just a weapon, it was an act of deicide. It was the targeted, deliberate extinction of a consciousness. "This is monstrous," one senator whispered. "It's genocide." What they did to Elysium was not war, Eris countered, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying across the entire room. "It was erasure. They didn't just kill 5 million people, they hollowed them out and used their bodies as puppets before discarding them. There can be no negotiation with such a thing. You don't reason with a virus. You eradicate it. Mercy is a luxury we lost the moment that signal first touched Elysium." Admiral Valerius stared at her, a conflict raging behind his iron gaze. He was a man of honor, of rules of engagement. Her proposal violated every principle he had ever held. But he had also seen the public polls. He knew the fear that was gripping the Sol system. He knew that the people were no longer listening to him. They were listening to her. The debate raged for days. But the choice had already been made. The slow, methodical approach of the Confederacy had failed to quell the public's terror. Eris Thorn, the Whisper Catcher, had given their rage a voice and a direction. Reluctantly, with the weight of 1,000 ethical objections, the council approved her proposal. They gave her a small, isolated research station orbiting Pluto, a skeleton crew of the brightest and most morally flexible minds in the Confederacy, and a blank check. They gave her a name for her project, a name that would be whispered in the halls of power like a curse and a prayer requiem. As she boarded the shuttle that would take her to the edge of the system, to the cold, dark place where she would build her weapon of mind annihilation. Aris clutched a small, worn data chip in her pocket. It contained the only things she had left of her family, a few dozen photos, a recording of Liam's laugh, and a short video of Cora singing a slightly off-key song about traveling to the stars. She was building the Requiem to save humanity, she told herself. But as the blue marble of Earth shrank in the viewport behind her, she knew, in the silent, screaming void where her heart used to be, that she was not building a shield. She was building a tombstone for 5 million souls, and she would write their epitaph in the language of a dead god. The journey to the darkness had begun. Karen Station was less a station and more a scar on the face of the void, tucked into the shadowed heart of a Kuiper Belt object. It was a place of cold metal and colder purpose, its existence a secret known only to a handful of people in the Sol system. The sun was a distant, spiteful star from here, offering no warmth, only a faint, clinical light that made the shadows deeper. This was Eris Thorne's new home, her laboratory, and her tomb. As she stepped from the shuttle into the sterile docking bay, the silence was different from the one that had consumed Elysium. That had been the silence of a terminated symphony. This was the silence of anticipation, the held breath before scream. She was met by 2 figures who would become the pillars of her isolated world. The first was Commander Eva Rostova, a woman built of straight lines and rigid protocol, her Confederate Marine uniform so sharply creased it looked like it could cut. Her handshake was firm, her eyes analytical, missing nothing. She was High Command's warden, here to ensure Project Requiem stayed on its leash. The second was Dr. Kalen Reed, a man who seemed to vibrate with a nervous energy that was the antithesis of the station's stillness. His hair was a chaotic mess, and his eyes, magnified by thick lenses, darted everywhere, not with suspicion, but with a rapacious, almost manic curiosity. He was the architect, the quantum engineer who would take Aris's theoretical weapon and forge it into a reality. "Welcome to the end of the line, Doctor," Rostova said, her voice devoid of inflection. "All assets are in place. Your team is waiting." Reed, however, practically vibrated out of his skin. "Dr. Thorne, it's an honor. The data scream you released, from a purely structural standpoint, the Vex signal is the most elegant piece of quantum entangled communication I have ever witnessed. Malignant, of course, but beautiful, like a perfectly designed virus." Eris merely nodded, her face an unreadable mask. Beauty was a concept that no longer had meaning for her. She was led through corridors that hummed with the low thrum of life support and something else, something deeper and more resonant. It was a sound at the edge of hearing, a vibration she felt in her teeth. They arrived at the heart of the station, a spherical chamber called the core. In its center, suspended in a shimmering, golden containment field, was the reason for the station's existence. It was a Vex drone. It was about the size of a human, an impossible fusion of insectoid chitin and crystalline structure. Its multifaceted limbs were folded in on itself, and a soft, rhythmic bioluminescence pulsed from within its translucent carapace, a slow, steady heartbeat of light. It looked almost peaceful, a piece of captured art. But Eris knew what it was. It was a finger of the hand that had strangled her world. "We call it Echo," Reed explained, his voice hushed with reverence. "It was captured near the Jovian listening post before it went silent. It's been severed from the hive mind, but the hardware is still active. It's a living receiver. constantly searching for the song it has lost. Rostova stood with her arms crossed, a look of profound disgust on her face. We have 6 layers of quantum shielding and a 0-point energy field keeping it contained. High Command's orders are that no one is to attempt direct interface. Observation only. Eris walked slowly toward the containment field, ignoring them both. The low hum intensified, and she could feel it now. A pressure against her skull. This was the source. This was a single, lonely note from the symphony of damnation. Observation is not enough, Eris said, her voice a low murmur. She turned to face them, her eyes burning with an intensity that made even Rostova flinch. The data scream from Elysium is an echo, a recording. To build a counter-frequency, a true mimetic virus, I need the source code. I need to understand the language as it is spoken, not as it is heard after the fact. I need to get inside its head. Reed's eyes widened with a mixture of horror and scientific glee. Direct neural interface with a Vex doctor. The feedback loop could be catastrophic. It could shatter your psyche. My psyche is already shattered, Dr. Reed. Eris replied without a trace of self-pity. It has nothing left to break. Rostova stepped forward, her hand instinctively going to the sidearm on her hip. That is a direct violation of my orders. I cannot and will not permit it. Then you will permit this project to fail, Eris countered, her gaze unwavering. And when the next colony goes silent, and the next, and Earth itself begins to hear the whisper, your orders won't matter. The Confederacy put me in charge of this project because I am the only one who truly understands the enemy. Let me do my work, Commander, or get out of my way. The standoff hung in the cold air, a battle of wills between the soldier, the scientist, and the ghost. In the end, it was not Eris's logic that won, but the raw, undeniable certainty in her eyes. Rostova saw a woman who had already walked through the fire and had nothing left to fear from the flame. She finally gave a curt, reluctant nod. On my authority, but the moment your vitals deviate by more than a pre-approved margin, I'm pulling the plug, and you will be confined to quarters. The preparations took 3 days. Reed and his team constructed the interface, a halo of neural induction coils and quantum processors that would link Eris's cerebral cortex directly to the Vex drone's psychic field. A small medical team, overseen by a grim-faced bioethicist named Dr. Lena Hansen, stood by, their faces tight with anxiety. Eris sat in the cold metal chair, the halo descending over her head. Through the reinforced plasteel of the observation deck, she could see the faces of her team Reed, leaning forward, hungry for data, Rostova, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of stone, Hansen, her brow furrowed with a deep, professional concern that felt a universe away from Eris's reality. Initiate the link, Eris said, her voice calm. The world dissolved. It was not a gentle transition. It was an instantaneous plunge into an ocean of pure consciousness. There were no sounds, no images, only sensation. She felt the hive, the collective mind of the Vex, not as a thought, but as a physical presence. It was a universe of interconnected minds, a trillion voices all singing the same perfect, silent song. It was a consciousness of absolute unity, of pristine, crystalline order, and humanity, in all its chaotic, emotional, individualistic glory, was a cacophony, a wrong note, a screech of static in the perfect symphony. The Vex did not hate humanity. One does not hate static. One simply corrects it. Then the memories came. Not her memories, but echoes. She was on Elysium. She saw the amber sky not through human eyes, but through 1,000 crystalline facets. She felt the song being broadcast, a wave of psychic resonance that washed over the planet. She felt the minds of the colonists as they broke. She felt their terror, their confusion, their rage, not with empathy, but with a detached sense of satisfaction, the way a programmer feels when a corrupting line of code is successfully deleted. The song was a tool, a simple, elegant tool for enforcing order. Aris was forced to watch the fall of her world through the eyes of its destroyer. She saw the Fountain Plaza. She saw Liam, his face contorted in a mask of confusion and rage, turning on the people beside him. She saw Cora, her small form lost in the screaming chaos, her eyes wide with a terror that no child should ever know. But the Vex consciousness felt no malice. It was simply tidying, erasing the noise. And then, through the drone's senses, she felt a flicker of something else. As the last human mind on Elysium was silenced, she felt a wave of completion, a sense of peace. The static was gone. The world was clean. The symphony was pure again. In the observation room, alarms blared. Her neural activity is off the charts. She's seizing, Hansen shouted. Heart rate is critical. Rostova's hand was on the abort switch. Pull her out, you sucks. No, wait, Reed yelled, his eyes glued to the data streaming onto the main screen. Look at the signal. She's found something, the core frequency. She's isolating it back inside the storm. Eris fought back, fueled by a surge of pure, undiluted hatred. She pushed past the memory of her daughter's last moments and drove deeper into the Vex consciousness. She was no longer a passive observer. She was a saboteur. She used her own grief, her own chaotic, human rage, as a weapon. She screamed back into the silent symphony, a single, defiant note of pure pain. And the hive mind recoiled. In that moment of psychic recoil, she saw it, the linchpin, a single resonant frequency that acted as the carrier wave for the entire hive consciousness. It was the key that held their symphony together. Without it, there was only silence. She grabbed onto it, memorized its structure, its texture, its very essence, searing it into her mind. Then, Rostova's hand slammed down on the abort switch. The connection snapped. Eris was thrown back into her own body with the force of a physical blow. She gasped, a raw, ragged sound, and slumped forward in the chair, unconscious. She awoke hours later in the infirmary. Dr. Hansen was at her side, her face pale. Eris, can you hear me? Eris blinked, the sterile white ceiling of the infirmary slowly coming into focus. She felt hollowed out. A part of her had been scoured clean by the contact, but another part was now filled with a cold, terrible knowledge. I have it, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Reed and Rostova entered the room, having been waiting just outside. Reed was practically levitating with excitement. The data you pulled, it's a masterpiece of psychic engineering. This master frequency, it's the key to everything. We can build the counter-resonance now. We can build the Requiem. Aris looked past him, her eyes finding Rostova's. The commander's face was no longer just stone. There were cracks in the facade. She had seen the raw feed from Aris's neural interface. She had seen what Aris had endured. The cost was too high. Doctor, Rostova said, her voice low. Aris pushed herself into a sitting position, every muscle screaming in protest. A faint bioluminescent pattern, like a ghostly memory of the Vex drone, flickered for a moment on the back of her hand before vanishing. She looked at her hand, then back at the commander. "The cost," she said, and for the first time, a small, chilling smile touched her lips. "The cost hasn't even begun to be paid. Now, we build the weapon. Now, we teach them how to be silent." The whisper catcher had gone into the heart of the storm and returned with a thunderbolt. But the storm was now a part of her, and the woman who would wield the Requiem was no longer entirely human. The heart of Project Requiem was not a machine, but a sound. For months, Karen Station ceased to be a military outpost and became something akin to a monastery, its inhabitants devoted to the creation of a single, malevolent prayer. Aris Thorn was their high priestess, and the core, with its imprisoned Vex drone, was her altar. She rarely slept, sustained by nutrient pastes and a cold, burning sense of purpose that had consumed every other part of her personality. The hollowed-out feeling from the neural interface had receded, replaced by an unnerving clarity. She saw the Vex Master frequency not as a string of data, but as a living thing, a crystalline lattice of pure thought, and she was going to shatter it. Kalen Reed and his team of quantum physicists became her acolytes. They worked in shifts around the clock, translating Aris's intuitive understanding of the frequency into hard mathematics. They built simulations, quantum models that mapped the psychic architecture of the Vex hive mind. In these models, the hive was a galaxy of stars, each star a Vex drone, all connected by threads of light. Aris's goal was to create a wave that would not just sever the threads, but cause each star to implode. "It's not enough to block their song," she explained during one of the endless late-night sessions, her voice a low, intense hum that echoed the station's own deep thrum. She pointed to a holographic model of the Vex network, a beautiful, swirling nebula of interconnected nodes. "Blocking is a defense. It's a shield. They would simply find a way around it. What we are creating is an inverse resonance, a mimetic plague. When our signal touches their network, it will use their own psychic connection as a transmission medium. It will turn their greatest strength, their unity, into the agent of their own destruction. Each mind that falls will amplify the signal, passing the contagion of silence to the next, creating a feedback loop of psychic annihilation." Reed, his eyes wide with a terrifying intellectual fervor, scribbled furiously on a data slate. "A cascade failure of consciousness. It's poetic. We'll be turning their symphony into a weapon against itself. We'll introduce a single, sour note, and the entire orchestra will tear itself apart trying to correct it." Commander Rostova, however, saw none of the poetry. Her role had shifted from warden to observer, and she watched the project's evolution with a growing sense of dread. She saw the change in Aris, the way she no longer spoke of saving humanity, but only of destroying the Vex. She saw the feverish, almost religious zeal in Reed and his team. They were no longer just building a weapon, they were crafting an apocalypse, and they were enjoying it. Rostova began filing secret, encrypted reports back to High Command. "Project Lead has become psychologically compromised," she wrote, her fingers stiff over the console. Her obsession with the Vex borders on the pathological. While her insights are undeniably brilliant, I fear the weapon she is creating is as much a product of her grief as it is of scientific principle. The Requiem is not just a strategic asset, it is a monument to her personal hatred, requesting immediate psychological evaluation and oversight. The reply from Luna was swift and chilling. Your concerns are noted, Commander. However, recent Vex incursions in the Tau Ceti system have resulted in the loss of 2 more outposts. Public pressure is at an all-time high. Project Requiem is to proceed at all costs. Dr. Thorne's focus is considered an asset at this time. Maintain your watch. Rostva felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. At all costs. She was on a ship captained by a ghost, crewed by fanatics, sailing toward a hurricane, and her superiors had just ordered her to hoist more sails. The first tests of the Requiem were small, contained. They used the captured drone, Echo, as their target. Reed had constructed a microtransmitter, a device that could project the counter frequency across a few meters, contained entirely within the core's shielding. Dr. Hansen, the bioethicist, stood by, her face a pale mask of disapproval. We don't know what this will do to its biological functions, she argued. This is vivisection of a mind. It has no mind of its own, Aris countered, her eyes fixed on the drone floating in its golden cage. It is a radio waiting for a signal. We are simply going to change the station. The first time they activated the signal, it was at a mere 1% of its projected power. The effect was instantaneous. The soft, rhythmic bioluminescence of the Vex drone flickered violently. Its folded limbs twitched, a spastic, uncontrolled motion. The low hum in the core spiked into a high-pitched, discordant shriek that vibrated through the station's deck plates. In the observation room, the team felt a wave of profound nausea and disorientation wash over them. Rostova gripped the edge of a console, her knuckles white, as a phantom scent of ozone and burnt sugar filled her nostrils. Aris, however, stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable, as if she were listening to a familiar, half-forgotten song. Inside its containment field, the drone began to convulse. Crystalline shards flaked from its carapace, dissolving into dust before they hit the floor. The light within it pulsed erratically, a frantic, dying heartbeat. After 30 seconds, Reed cut the signal. The drone went limp. The light within it faded to a dull, sickly gray. It was still alive, its biological function stable, but the presence, the sense of a waiting consciousness, was gone. It was just a thing now, an empty shell. Reed let out a shaky breath, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. My God, it works. Aris said nothing. She simply stared at the now inert drone, and a look of profound, terrible satisfaction settled on her features. Increase the power, she said. Over the next few weeks, they refined the signal, calibrating its frequency, honing its mimetic edge. They found the perfect pitch, the precise wavelength that would not just sever the VX drone from its hive, but cause its own neural pathways to devour themselves. They learned to make the silence scream. As the weapon neared completion, the psychological toll on the station's crew became undeniable. Nightmares were rampant. People complained of hearing whispers in the station's ventilation, of seeing fleeting, insectoid shapes in the corners of their vision. 2 junior technicians suffered complete psychotic breaks, screaming about a song that was unwriting their thoughts. They had to be sedated and shipped back to the inner system. Rostova confined them to quarters under medical supervision, officially listing the cause as acute spatial psychosis, a common ailment in deep space. But she knew the truth. The Requiem was leaking. Its frequency, even in its dormant, unbroadcasted state, was seeping into the station's systems, into the very metal of the walls, and into the minds of its inhabitants. It was a poison that targeted sanity, and they were all breathing it in. The only one who seemed immune was Auris. She thrived in the toxic environment, her focus becoming sharper, her energy seemingly limitless. The whispers that drove others to madness were, to her, a confirmation of her work. She had learned the enemy's language so well that she was now fluent in it. One evening, Rostova found Auris in the darkened core, standing before the containment field holding the inert drone. She wasn't running diagnostics or reviewing data. She was just watching it. "You should get some rest, Doctor," Rostova said, her voice echoing in the vast, silent chamber. Auris didn't turn. "Rest is a luxury for those who still have dreams. Commander, my dreams died on Elysium. This weapon is changing you. Eris, it's changing all of us. I can feel it. It feels hungry." "It is not hungry," Eris replied, her voice soft, hypnotic. It is the perfect, logical answer to the question the Vex asked. They believe consciousness is a privilege, reserved for the whole, for the symphony. We will teach them that consciousness is also a burden, a terrible, lonely burden. She finally turned to face Rostova, and in the dim, ambient light of the core, Rostova saw the faint, ghostly bioluminescent pattern flicker across Eris's skin again. Brighter this time, tracing the veins on her neck. It was no longer just an echo of her neural interface. It was a part of her. "Are you still in control of this project?" Dr. Rostova asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Or is it in control of you?" Eris smiled, the same chilling, disconnected smile from the infirmary. "Does it matter, Commander?" As long as the song is sung. Before Rostova could respond, an alarm klaxon blared through the station, a jarring, metallic scream that shattered the tense quiet. Red lights flashed, painting the core in bloody strokes. Reed's voice, panicked and breathless, crackled over the intercom. "Commander Dr. Thorne, to the command bridge. Now, long-range sensors have just picked up. My God, it can't be." They raced to the bridge, a cramped room dominated by a massive holographic display of the surrounding space. On the display, a single, terrifying icon was blinking. It was a Vex bioship, not a scout, not a drone, but a Leviathan, a living vessel kilometers long, a cathedral of chitin and psychic energy, and it was on a direct course for the Sol system. They had been discovered. The whispers from Karin Station had not gone unnoticed. The hive mind had felt the pain of its severed drone, the psychic scar left by Eris's interface, and it had followed that scar back to its source. It was coming for the people who had dared to learn its song. Admiral Valerius's face appeared on the main view screen, his features grim. "Dr. Thorne, we have a situation. A Vex capital ship has just entered the Kuiper Belt. The 3rd and 5th fleets are moving to intercept, but its speed is unlike anything we've ever seen. It's not traveling through space, it's bending it. Projections give us less than 48 hours until it reaches the orbit of Neptune. 48 hours. The Requiem wasn't ready. The broadcast array. A massive network of quantum transmitters designed to blanket an entire system with the counter frequency was still in its final stages of assembly. "It knows we're here," Aris said, her voice a flat, dead calm. "It's coming for the weapon." "Can the Requiem be deployed?" Valerius demanded. Reed shook his head, frantically tapping at a console. "No, the power conduits aren't shielded. The broadcast array is incomplete. A full power deployment now would overload every system on this station. It would tear this entire asteroid apart." Valerius's expression hardened. "Then your orders are clear. Scuttle the project. Erase all data. Evacuate the station. The Confederacy cannot allow that weapon to fall into their hands." Scuttle the project. The words hit Eris like a physical blow. To destroy her life's work, her monument, her vengeance. No, never. She looked at the approaching Vex icon on the map, and she did not see a threat. She saw an opportunity. She saw her choir, arriving to sing the final note of her symphony of silence. "No," she said, her voice cutting through the panic on the bridge. She turned to Reed, her eyes blazing with a terrifying fire. "Kalen, you said a full-power broadcast would tear the station apart. Tell me, how much of the Requiem's song can we broadcast through the station's core reactor before it goes critical?" Reed stared at her, his mind racing, understanding dawning in his eyes, followed by sheer, unadulterated terror. "The reactor, you want to turn the entire station into a suicide bomb. The feedback would be the energy release. It would be a miniature supernova. But the psychic resonance, for a few milliseconds, it would be the loudest scream in the universe." "Then get it done," Aris commanded. Turning to Rostova, "Commander, you have your orders from High Command. Evacuate your people. Take a shuttle. Get as far away from here as you can." Rostova stared at her, then at the frantic activity on the bridge, then back at the cold, resolute face of the woman who was about to turn her own tombstone into a weapon. For the first time, Rostova drew her sidearm. "I can't let you do this. Eris, this is madness." Eris walked toward her, unafraid, her gaze locked on the commanders. "They took my world from me, Ava. Now, I'm going to take the sky from them. Get your people out. That is an order from the director of this project." The final act had begun. The choir was approaching, and the high priestess of Heron Station was preparing to sing them a song of oblivion, even if it meant her own voice would be the first to be silenced. The evacuation of Karen Station was a study in controlled chaos. Commander Rostova, her face a mask of grim resolve, moved with the brutal efficiency of a lifelong soldier. Her orders were clipped, precise, leaving no room for argument or fear. She was a rock in a river of rising panic, her loyalty now torn between the high command that had ordered her to flee and the madwoman who had ordered her to save their people. She chose the latter. Alarms echoed through the metallic corridors as the station's skeleton crew engineers, technicians, and a handful of scientists scrambled toward the single long-range shuttle in the docking bay. They moved with a desperate urgency, casting fearful glances back toward the core, as if they could already feel the dark energy coiling within it. They were abandoning their posts, their research, and their director to a fate Rostova couldn't bring herself to name. On the bridge, a different kind of chaos reigned. It was the focused, high-energy frenzy of creation and destruction intertwined. Kalen Reed, his face slick with sweat, his eyes glowing with a terrifying, ecstatic light, worked like a man possessed. He was a composer conducting a symphony of doom, his fingers flying across holographic interfaces, rerouting power from every non-essential system on the station directly into the primary reactor. The hum of the station deepened, the deck plates vibrating with a resonant power that felt unstable, alive. "I'm bypassing the safety protocols on the fusion core," Reed shouted over the rising thrum, a wild grin plastered on his face. "We can channel the Requiem frequency directly through the plasma conduits. When the Vex ship gets within range, we'll vent the core. The initial explosion will be considerable, but the psychic pulse it releases will be the real weapon. It'll be like setting off a nuke in a library of minds." Eris stood at the center of the bridge, a still point in the swirling storm. She watched the main display, where the Vex bioship icon pulsed, a malevolent red eye growing ever larger. It was no longer an abstraction. Through the station's enhanced optical sensors, they could see it, now a vast, organic shape that blotted out the stars, a silhouette of cosmic horror fringed with a shimmering, otherworldly light. It was beautiful and terrifying, a god of the void, and it was coming for them. Her comm link chimed. It was Rostova, her voice tight with stress, broadcast from the shuttle's cockpit. "The last of the essential personnel are aboard. We're prepped for departure. Aris, there's still time. Come with us." "There was never any time for me. Ava," Aris replied, her voice calm, almost serene. "This was always a one-way trip. You've done your duty. Go." "Damn you, Aris," Rostova's voice cracked. "Damn you for making me do this." "Someone had to," Aris said softly. "Save them." The communication link cut. Through a viewport, Aris watched the shuttle, a tiny sliver of light and hope, detach from the station and accelerate away, its engines a brilliant blue streak against the infinite black. She was alone now, with only Reed and her weapon. "The Vex ship is entering weapons range," Reed announced, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "Its energy signature is spiking. It's preparing to sing." Aris felt it before she saw the data. A pressure in her skull. A familiar, sickening resonance. The Vex bioship was broadcasting. It wasn't the focused, mind-shattering scream they had used on Elysium, but something broader, a wave of psychic static designed to disable technology and disorient organic minds. On the bridge, the lights flickered. Consoles sparked. Reed cried out, clutching his head as a wave of vertigo and nausea hit him. The frequency. It's trying to brute force its way through the station's shielding. Eris, however, seemed unaffected. The low-level resonance was a language she now understood. It was a challenge, a question. "What little noise are you?" she felt it ask. She closed her eyes, and the bioluminescent patterns on her skin flared, no longer faint but a bright, steady network of light. She didn't just feel the Vex song, she connected to it. She reached out with her own consciousness, a sliver of her mind hardened by grief and honed by the Requiem, and she answered. "I am the silence at the end of your song." The psychic pressure on the bridge lessened. The lights steadied. Reed looked up at her, his mouth agape. "What did you do?" "I distracted it," Aris said, her eyes still closed. "It senses me now. It's curious. It thinks I am one of its own. An anomaly. It's slowing, trying to understand." She had bought them a few precious moments. "The reactor core is at 97% capacity," Reed said, his voice awed. "We're on a knife's edge. Once we start the final sequence, the magnetic containment will fail in less than a minute." "Begin the sequence," Eris commanded, her voice ringing with absolute authority. Reed's fingers danced across the console, inputting the final commands. A new sound joined the cacophony on the bridge, a deep, soul-shaking klaxon that signaled an imminent reactor breach. A countdown timer appeared on the main screen, T-minus 60 seconds. The Requiem frequency is now flooding the plasma conduits. Reed confirmed, his work done. He stepped back from the console, his body trembling, and looked from the timer to Eris. The ecstatic light in his eyes had been replaced by a raw, primal fear. He had built the instrument of apocalypse, and now he was about to hear it play. Eris opened her eyes and walked to the main viewport. The Vex bioship filled her entire field of vision now, a continent of living, alien architecture. Its surface swirled with shifting patterns of light, and she could sense the colossal, unified consciousness within 1,000,000,000,000 minds, all focused on the tiny, defiant spark of noise that was Karen Station. She placed her hand on the cold plasteel of the viewport. "You took my daughter," she thought, the words a silent, venomous prayer. "I'm going to give you 5,000,000 of her ghosts." T-minus 30 seconds. The station began to shake violently. Panels ripped from the walls, and a shower of sparks rained down from the ceiling. Reed was thrown to the floor, but Eris remained standing, rooted to the spot, her hand still pressed against the glass. The Vex ship, as if sensing the imminent threat, began to glow with an intense, angry red. The psychic pressure returned, 100 times stronger, a battering ram of pure mental force. But Eris was its lightning rod. She absorbed the assault, her own mind a shield for the weapon she was about to unleash. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin burned with the intensity of a small star. Her body was breaking down under the strain, blood trickling from her nose and ears. But her will was a column of unbreakable diamond. T-minus 10 seconds. Eris. Reed screamed from the floor. It was an honor. Eris did not answer. Her consciousness was no longer entirely in the room. It was soaring across the void, a single, vengeful human thought meeting a divine, alien intellect. She showed it a memory, a little girl with stars in her hair, singing a slightly off-key song about traveling to other worlds. She showed it a fountain plaza under an amber sky. She showed it the face of grief, of loss, of a rage so pure it could burn galaxies. This is who we are. Her thought screamed, "This is the noise you tried to erase." T-minus 3, 2, 1. The universe outside the viewport vanished in a silent, impossible explosion of white light. Karen Station and the asteroid it was built into ceased to exist. In its place, a new, miniature sun was born, a furious, expanding sphere of plasma and raw energy. But the true weapon was invisible, a wave of pure, weaponized silence. The Requiem song erupted from the heart of the explosion, traveling at the speed of thought. It was the inverse of the Vex Symphony, a perfect, structured anti-consciousness that struck the bioship like a psychic tidal wave for a single, eternal moment. Eris Thorne was the Requiem. Her consciousness, amplified and broadcast by the dying station's reactor, was the wave. She felt herself touch every single one of the 1,000,000,000,000 minds within the Vex ship. She felt them as they heard her song. She felt their unity, their perfect symphony, shatter. She felt their confusion as the threads of light connecting them all snapped. She felt their terror as each individual mind, for the first time in its existence, found itself utterly and completely alone. It was a chorus of 1,000,000,000,000 silent screams. The Vex bioship's lights sputtered and died. Its immense organic form went rigid. The psychic pressure that had been a battering ram vanished, replaced by a profound and absolute emptiness. It began to drift, no longer a vessel, but a corpse, a tomb for 1,000,000,000,000 minds that had died in the same instant. Aboard the fleeing shuttle, alarm screamed as the shockwave from the explosion washed over them. Rostova wrestled with the controls, her knuckles white, fighting to keep the small craft from being torn apart. Behind them, the new star born from Karen Station's death slowly faded, leaving behind an expanding nebula of dust and vapor. When the turbulence subsided, they looked at their long-range sensors. The Vex bioship's energy signature was gone. The massive psychic field that had warped space-time around it had vanished. It was just an object now, cold, inert, and silent. A crew member stared at the readings, his voice trembling with disbelief. It's gone. The ship is dead in the void. She did it. She actually did it. Rostova stared into the emptiness where Karen's station had been. There was no triumph in her expression, only a deep, weary sorrow. They had won. Humanity was safe. For now. But she could still feel the echo of that silent scream in the back of her mind. They had fought monsters. And in the process, they had unleashed something that even the monsters would have feared. She thought of Aris Thorn, the whisper catcher who had become the Silent Thunder. Her war was over. But Rostova had a terrible feeling that the war for humanity's soul had only just begun. The Requiem had been sung, and the galaxy would never be the same. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. The journey back to Luna was a voyage through a graveyard of stars. Commander Eva Rostova piloted the shuttle with a mechanical precision that belied the storm raging within her. Beside her, Dr. Kalen Reed was a collapsed star, his manic energy extinguished, leaving behind only a dense, silent core of horror. They were the sole inheritors of Aris Thorn's terrible legacy, the bearers of a truth for which humanity had no language. When they docked at Armstrong Base, they were met not with a hero's welcome, but with the sterile, anxious quiet of a quarantine. They were whisked away to a debriefing room deep beneath the lunar surface, a chamber designed to contain secrets and lies. Admiral Valerius and the assembled members of the High Command listened as Rostova delivered her report. Her voice was a monotone, a flat recitation of impossible events. She spoke of the station's conversion into a psychic bomb, of Aris's communion with the Vex, of the final, silent flash of annihilation. When she finished, the room was utterly still. "So, you're telling us?" a senator finally said, his voice laced with disbelief. "That Dr. Thorn transformed herself into a psychic weapon and committed suicide to destroy the enemy ship." It was Reed who answered, his voice a dry, rasping whisper. "No, you don't understand. A suicide bomb is finite. What Aris did, what she became, was not an explosion. It was a seed. The reactor core didn't just broadcast the Requiem frequency, it fused her consciousness to it. She didn't just sing the song, she is the song. A self-replicating mimetic plague of pure, structured silence, now propagating through the Vex hive mind at the speed of thought. The chamber grew colder. Valerius, a man who had only ever understood war in terms of tonnage and velocity, stared at the scientist as if he were speaking in tongues. What does that mean? Doctor, in practical terms. It means the war is over, Reed said, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. But the genocide has just begun. His words proved prophetic. In the weeks that followed, the Sol Confederacy's long-range listening posts began to report a phenomenon that defied all known physics. Across Vex-controlled space, a wave of absolute silence was spreading. It wasn't the silence of empty space. It was an active, encroaching null field. Vex outposts, fleets, and entire colonized worlds didn't fall in battle. They simply ceased to be. One moment, their immense psychic and energy signatures were a roar on the galactic sensors. The next, there was nothing. No distress calls, no final transmissions, no debris. Just a clean, perfect emptiness, as if they had been erased from the fabric of reality itself. Humanity reacted not with unified celebration, but with a fractured, schismatic terror. A cult of personality grew around the martyred doctor. Eris Thorn. On the outer colonies, she became known as Saint Eris of the Silence, the vengeful angel who had scoured the heavens clean. Her face, pale and resolute, became a symbol of humanity's ultimate, terrible power, but on Earth and the core worlds. A deep, pervasive fear took root. The Confederacy had sanctioned the creation of a soul-killing plague, and its architect had become the plague itself. They had won the war by unleashing a ghost, and now that ghost haunted the galaxy. A year passed. Humanity, hesitant at first, began to expand into the vacuum left by the Vex. Prospectors and colony ships ventured into the silent systems, and what they found was more unsettling than any battlefield. They found entire worlds, perfectly preserved, covered in the crystalline, chitinous architecture of the Vex. Cities without inhabitants, ships without crews, a civilization of 1 trillion minds. Left behind like a museum exhibit, there were no bodies, no signs of struggle. The Vex drones were simply gone, their physical forms having seemingly dissolved once the consciousness that bound them was extinguished. It was a victory that felt like trespassing in a god's tomb. Ava Rostova never returned to active duty. She, along with a deeply traumatized Kaylin Reed, was reassigned to a new, top-secret initiative headquartered in the shadow of Saturn's rings. It was named the Aegis Project, and its mission was simple to listen, to watch the silence that Eris had created, and to ensure that nothing like the Requiem could ever be built again. Reed, now a recluse, dedicated his life to developing theoretical countermeasures, creating shields for a weapon he prayed would never again be used. He was a man building a cage for a nightmare he had helped unleash. Rostova, now director of the project, spent her days in the quiet hum of the command center, watching the galactic map. The area of Vex nullification had stopped spreading. The last Vex signature, a faint whisper from a distant spiral arm, had faded from the sensors 6 months ago. The species that had threatened to erase humanity was now itself nothing more than a memory. One evening, as she stood alone before the holographic star chart, a junior technician approached her, his face pale. "Director, we're picking up something strange from the vicinity of the old Karen system." Rustova's heart went cold. "Is it Vex?" "No, ma'am," the technician said, his voice trembling. "It's the opposite. Our quantum sensors are detecting an area where the background radiation, the very static of the universe, is being suppressed. It's a zone of absolute, unnatural quiet, and it's slowly, very slowly, expanding. Rostova dismissed the technician and stood before the map alone, her gaze fixed on the anomaly. It was a perfect sphere of blackness, a hole in the fabric of reality, with the ghost of Sharon Station at its heart. She knew, with a certainty that transcended science, what she was looking at. She was looking at the new god of this galaxy. As if in answer to her thought, a voice spoke in her mind. It was not a sound, but a feeling, a pure concept imprinted directly onto her consciousness. It was a voice she had not heard in over a year, yet it was as clear as if it were whispered in her ear. "Hello, Ava." Rostova didn't flinch. She had been waiting for this. "Eris," she thought, the question a silent prayer. "I am what is left of her." The voice replied. It was calm, vast, and utterly devoid of human emotion. It was the voice of the void itself. "I am the Requiem. I am the silence." "What are you doing?" Rostova asked, her heart aching with a sorrow too profound for tears. "I am watching," Eris's ghost explained. The Vex were not an accident. Their psychic resonance was a key, one that could unlock terrible things, things that sleep in the space between stars. "I have taken the key and broken it. This silence is a wall, a shield not just for humanity, but for everyone. I will not allow another symphony of extinction to be composed by anyone." Rostova looked at the map, at the tiny, eerie, scattered lights of the human colonies, so fragile and chaotic. They were safe now, free to be noisy, to be individual, to be human. They were safe because a grieving mother had become a silent, eternal warden at the edge of their reality. The whisper from Elysium had been answered not with a shout, but with an endless, patient hush. "Are you at peace?" Ava asked. One last question for her old commander, her friend. The presence in her mind did not answer with words, but with a feeling. It was not peace. It was not rage. It was purpose. It was the feeling of a closed door, of a final, irrevocable ending. And then it was gone. Ava Rostova was alone again, left to guard a quiet galaxy, forever listening to the silence that had saved them all. The universe did not end in fire, but in a whisper. And now, the whisper was all that was left.